The ledger should never have been found. It had slipped behind a false panel in the abandoned records room of the old Okmulgee County building, an airless chamber where dust turned the sunlight into pale, suspended fog. When archivist Dr. Martha Ellis pried the panel free, she expected mice, maybe discarded tax files. Instead, she pulled out a book no larger than a man's hand, bound in brittle leather that crackled as she opened it. Inside were pages the color of old bone, ruled in fading ink, the script elegant, consistent, bureaucratic. A plantation log, she thought at first glance. Grain inventories. Tax assessments. The usual arithmetic of the 19th century South. But halfway through, she froze. A column ran straight down the page, no crop tallies, no debts, no figures. Only women's names. Scores of them. And beside each name, in a darker ink laid down years later by a different hand, stood a single word, found. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment where you're watching from. Martha leaned closer, breath shallow. Under magnification, the neat columns dissolved into something far more unsettling. The entries listed ages, pregnancies, scars left by old injuries, notes on temperament and labor SK*LL, details used not for care, but for ownership. Every woman cataloged had been enslaved on plantations lining the Okmulgee River. All had vanished over the same 8-month span in 1848. Their disappearances were never recorded in newspapers, never mentioned in plantation correspondence, never entered into official county books. Yet someone, years later, had returned to this ledger and marked each one found, as if confirming receipt of an item long misplaced. But the hand that wrote the names was not the hand that wrote that word. One script was rigid, methodical. The other was hurried, slanted, almost furtive. They did not belong to the same era, or the same conscience. Martha felt it instantly. This ledger wasn't a record that survived by chance. It was a record that someone had tried, and failed, to bury. Its pages were not telling her an accounting of the past, they were whispering the outline of disappearances no one was ever meant to uncover. Martha didn't go home that night. She sat beneath the humming fluorescent lights of the archive basement, the ledger opened before her like a wound that wouldn't close. At midnight she placed a call to the only person she trusted. With something of this magnitude, historian Dr. Samuel Carver, whose work on antebellum Georgia had earned both praise and whispered resentment from local officials. He arrived before dawn, still wearing yesterday's shirt, carrying a thermos of coffee and a stack of reference texts under his arm. Carver examined the ledger without speaking. His fingers traced the neat columns of women's names, Luella, Mary, and Tessa, Ruth, Eliza, each followed by coded notes describing age, height, number of pregnancies, notable scars, strong back. SK*lead midwife, quiet temperament. These were not personal details, they were valuations. He turned pages slowly, his brow tightening. 18 to 35, he murmured. Every one of them. That's not a coincidence. That's selection. And mothers, Martha added quietly. All of them had children. He nodded. Which is precisely why they wouldn't have run. He moved to the chalkboard on the wall and began jotting names, dates, plantation locations, visualizing the pattern emerging from the ink. The women came from different estates but the same corridor of land, a sinuous band hugging the Okmulgee River for nearly 50 miles. Plantations that, on paper, had no ties to one another. No shared ownership. No shared overseers. Except proximity to the water. Carver stepped back, his face shadowed with the same unease that had seized Martha hours earlier. 1848 was a fearful year in Georgia, he said. After the rebellion rumors in Louisiana, patrols along the river tightened. Planters were convinced something was coming. Runaway scares everywhere. Mothers didn't escape alone, let alone in groups. Not like this. Not silently. So these disappearances, Martha began. Not self-driven, Carver finished. These were taken. He flipped to the page where the strange after the fact entries appeared, the single word found scrawled in darker ink with a different slant, different pressure. Someone had returned to this ledger long after the initial documentation, marking each woman's fate with a word that implied rescue but felt more like verdict. Carver tapped the word with the end of his pen. This isn't the language of search parties. This is inventory control. He paced, searching his memory. There were whispers that year, unconfirmed rumors about a group moving people along the river at night, never caught, never named. But scholars dismissed them as folklore. We assumed escapes that never made it into the record. Martha felt the weight of the ledger pressing into her palms. But these women weren't escaping, she said. They were being taken. For a purpose. Carver exhaled slowly. Coordinated abductions. But coordinated. By whom? Independent raiders? Landowners colluding? Traffickers moving people? East instead of west? He flipped another page, stopping at an entry where a woman named Clarissa was described, 29 years old, 2 children, scar across left shoulder. A small numeral appeared beside her name, one that matched similar marks 2 pages earlier and 2 pages after. A system, not a notation. This ledger wasn't meant to be seen by anyone outside the network, Carver said. It's too clean. Too concise. Plantation records are messy, full of disputes, errors, smudges. This was compiled with intention. And hidden with intention, Martha added. Someone sealed it behind that panel because it was the one record they couldn't destroy. Carver closed the book gently, as though afraid it might dissolve into ash. This ledger isn't just evidence of disappearances. It's the opening page of an operation we don't yet understand. He looked at Martha, and the fluorescent lights carved hollows beneath his eyes. We're not dealing with lost history, he said. We're dealing with erased history. And someone with power, someone with reach, wanted it gone. The next morning, Martha and Carver moved their work into the scanning lab, an old storage room converted into a digital imaging suite where the hum of machinery filled the air like a restrained warning. The ledger rested beneath the scanner's glass, its brittle pages illuminated by cold, unforgiving light. Carver monitored the feed on the monitor while Martha hovered behind him, arms crossed, as though bracing herself for whatever the machine might reveal. At ordinary resolution, the ink looked stable, its strokes clean and composed. But when the scanner began its enhanced ultraviolet pass, ghostly impressions surfaced, lines. Beneath the lines, figures partly erased yet still clinging to the paper like memories refusing to die. Shadows of a previous draft. There, Carver said, enlarging a faint set of characters concealed beneath an entry for a woman named Harriet. The letters weren't letters at all, but codes, alphanumeric. Strings resembling inventory marks, the kind used in warehouse manifests or shipping records. Martha leaned close. This wasn't written for plantation use. These are transport codes. And they were consistent. Dozens of entries bore the same faint markings, hidden under the ink of later overwriting. Some names had small cross-shaped marks beside them, barely visible unless the light struck at just the right angle. Others had entire columns where someone had scraped the paper down until it nearly tore, removing what appeared to be numerical values, prices, perhaps, or weights. These cross marks, Carver murmured, they're identifiers. Grouping symbols. For what? Martha asked, though she already felt the answer forming, a dread tightening in her spine. Carver typed quickly through a database of antebellum sales logs, matching the residual codes with archived manifests from Georgia, the Carolinas, and coastal markets further east. Most yielded nothing. But when he filtered for Charleston's mid-century auction books, the screen flickered with a match. Martha's breath caught. The codes appeared beside several women's names, names identical to ones in the ledger, though altered slightly in the Charleston entries. Ages adjusted by a few years. Scars omitted. Children unmentioned. And always, each woman listed as property from a bankrupt Georgia estate. Carver shook his head. There was no such estate. I've read those county filings. Nothing collapsed in 48. So this was a cover, Martha whispered. They weren't selling estate holdings. They were selling stolen women. Carver clicked another record. Under new names. Rebranded to hide origin. And look at the dates. They appear in Charleston months after they vanished from the Ocmulgee corridor. The room seemed to tilt. What the ledger had recorded wasn't an endpoint but a beginning, an intake log made before transport, before erasure, before renaming. A presale index. This wasn't the work of itinerant kidnappers, Carver said. This was systematic. Someone with access to multiple plantations. Someone with clerks, boats, forged paperwork. Martha touched the glass casing of the scanner, the faint hum vibrating through her fingertips. If these are shipping codes, they weren't meant to be seen by county officials. They were for internal use. Carver nodded grimly. Which means this ledger wasn't a plantation record at all. It was an operational document. A tool for coordinating inventory, human inventory, across multiple sites. He paged back to the word written later beside each name, found. Its ink, darker and less steady, looked almost triumphant under magnification. A confirmation. But this word, Martha said softly. Who added it? And when? Carver steadied the stroke pressure. Likely after delivery. Someone tracking outcomes. Someone making sure shipments arrived. Martha felt a cold certainty settle in her chest. So found wasn't a rescue. It was a receipt. The scanner emitted a sharp beep, another hidden layer detected, faint but present. Under the scraped-off financial column lay the outline of numbers, values blurred nearly beyond retrieval but still traceable. Martha stared at them, her throat tightening. Prices, she said. Someone tried to erase the prices. Carver closed the ledger gently, as though sealing something dangerous inside. This book, he said, was created to move people. To erase them from one world and sell them into another. And the people who did it knew exactly how to hide their trail. He looked at Martha with a heaviness that made the silence between them feel vast. The ledger isn't the whole story. It's the smoke left behind after something far larger burned. The map unfurled across the table like a confession. Carver weighted the corners with archival weights, tracing the Ocmulgee River's path with a fingertip as Martha pinned each disappearance to its nearest landmark. One by one, the points emerged, tiny red pins forming a chain that clung to the river's edge like drops of blood pulled along by the current. Foggy nights. No witnesses. No tracks. Just absence repeating itself with such precision it no longer resembled chance. If they were moved at night, Carver said, they would have needed a staging point. Martha tapped an area on the map, an abandoned warehouse noted on an 1840 survey but absent from the 1850 revision. There. Riverside storage. Built for cotton transport. Fell out of use after the flood. Carver nodded. Hidden enough to avoid patrols. Accessible enough to move people quickly. He marked it with a dark X. They imagined the nights of 1848 as if they were unfolding again, the mist rising off the water, lanterns swinging like solitary stars across the Black River, a flatboat sliding soundlessly between cypress shadows. Somewhere, a woman was taken from her cabin before dawn, chloroform or laudanum dulling her cries. Her children slept 2 doors away, told later that she must have wandered, must have run, must have lost her mind and fled into the woods. Families punished for asking questions. Patrols claiming they found no tracks because they had been told not to see them. It required more than one man, Martha whispered. More than one plantation. Carver didn't look up. Clerks forging interstate transfers. Physicians providing sedatives. Warehouse workers maintaining a holding site. Boatmen navigating the river at night. And the landowners who allowed their enslaved women to be reassigned without protest. The word reassigned hung in the air like something rancid. Martha examined the ledger again. The dates aren't random. They cluster. 3 in late April. 5 in early June. A gap in July. Then 6 more in August. That's scheduling. Someone organized pickups by river flow and moonlight. Carver ran a hand across his face. And look at the spacing, never 2 taken from the same plantation within a week. That's to avoid drawing suspicion. It also means, Martha said quietly, this wasn't impulsive. It was sustained. A system designed to operate in silence, like a machine hidden beneath the soil. They reconstructed an individual night, the warehouse lit only by a single lantern, the boards creaking as the boatmen hauled unconscious women into the long room. A clerk checked their names against a draft ledger, this ledger. A doctor verified they were alive but subdued. Another man scraped off an old column, removing the numbers that had once assigned their value to the people who claimed ownership over them. And in the morning, the river carried them southward, deeper into a world where their names would be stripped and replaced without hesitation. Martha's hands trembled slightly as she pieced together the timeline. Their children must have searched for them. Their husbands, their mothers. And the patrols, Carver said, were instructed to find nothing. He pulled a folder from his bag, reports from scattered counties that mentioned unusual calm during months when disappearances should have triggered manhunts. This wasn't negligence, he said. It was compliance. A final detail sealed their reconstruction. In an 1848 shipping manifest from Charleston, a document Carver had retrieved earlier that morning, there was a notation in the margin beside a cluster of women's names, received by Night River Transport. Condition, stable. The handwriting matched the faint coded marks Martha had uncovered beneath the ledger entries. Everything aligned, the routes, the codes, the gaps in patrol reports, the erased financial columns. A pipeline designed to turn mothers into merchandise, moved through darkness with the precision of a military operation. Martha stepped back from the table, suddenly aware of the silence pressing against the walls. This wasn't just tragedy, she said. It was architecture. A hidden structure built on stolen bodies. Carver closed the map gently, as though covering the dead. And we've only scraped the surface, he said. If this ledger survived, then somewhere, someone saved more than one secret. The ledger had grown perilous, every detail sharpening into something too coherent, too damning. But until the moment Martha found the sliver of paper wedged between 2 brittle pages, she and Carver still clung to the faint possibility that they were misinterpreting fragments of a shattered past. Then the fragment fell into her lap, thin as onion skin, nearly dissolved by time, its edges eaten by silverfish. Carver held his breath as she unfolded it. It was not a letter in the polite 19th century sense. No salutation, no signature, no social pretext. It was a list. A set of coded entries written in the same angular hand that had added the word found to the ledger, hurried, utilitarian, almost breathless. At the top, in faint but legible script, were the words, to Bradford and Kane Trading Company, confirming shipment. Martha's throat tightened. Shipment, she whispered. Not individuals. Not workers. Shipments. Carver adjusted his glasses and leaned over her shoulder. The codes on the page matched the erased underlayers in the ledger exactly, same sequences, same cross marks. The women's names weren't present, but the numbers corresponded perfectly. These were the identifiers, he said. This document was sent to confirm delivery. Martha held the fragment under the scanning light. The ink, faded to sepia, darkened at the pressure points, places where the writer had pressed harder, as if impatient or afraid. Several lines contained short notes, all accounted for. No incident on river. New names assigned upon arrival. And beside 3 entries, a brief notation, BNC satisfied. Carver exhaled slowly. Bradford and Kane was a trading syndicate, textiles, timber, shipping routes up and down the coast. Nothing in the public record connects them to human trafficking. Because the public record was never meant to, Martha said. This wasn't their front-facing business. This was their shadow ledger. One final detail cinched the meaning of found. Near the bottom of the page, the writer had added, status, all 17 found. Delivered on schedule. Compensation logged. It was confirmation of arrival, not rescue. Martha felt something inside her hollow out. That single word, repeated beside every vanished name in the ledger, had never been meant to soothe a searching family or placate a worried owner. It was an internal stamp of success. Found equals delivered, she said. Found means received by the buyer. But the final revelation struck harder than either of them expected. Below the confirmation lines, 3 small sets of initials appeared, inked in the same hand, each followed by a number indicating payment share. Carver squinted at them, then paled. I know these, he said. These aren't clerks or boatmen. These are the initials of landowners, 3 of the wealthiest plantation families in the county. Their descendants sit on museum boards, political committees. One runs the State Historical Commission. Martha scanned the initials again. She recognized one, everyone in the region did. Streets bore that name. Scholarships. A courthouse. They profited directly, she whispered. They weren't passive participants. They were investors. Carver sank into a chair, the fluorescent light turning his face ashen. This wasn't a rogue operation exploiting gaps in the system. This was the system. People with influence coordinated this. People with enough power to remove every trace except this ledger. Martha folded the fragment gently, though her hands trembled. It felt like holding a detonator. One slip and decades of curated historical narratives would collapse. Now we know what the ledger was, she said. A manifest. A register of stolen women prepared for sale to an interstate trafficking network. And the word found, Carver added, is the quietest lie in this entire archive. He reached for the ledger but stopped short, refusing to touch it again as if it carried a contagion centuries old. Martha, he said, this isn't just evidence of a crime. It's evidence of a conspiracy that shaped this county's legacy. And the people who benefited built their reputations on the silence of these pages. The room seemed to shrink around them, walls buckling under the weight of what they had uncovered. The proof was irrefutable. The twist was undeniable. And the implications were far from over. The ledger no longer felt like paper. It felt like a living engine, small, quiet, and built to do harm so efficiently that no one would ever suspect its true purpose. Martha and Carver laid it open on the table again, but now the familiar columns had transformed. They were no longer reading a record, they were reading a system. Carver drew a slow breath. Look at the structure, he said. Dates in the first column. Not owners, handlers. Notes on health, appraisals for transport. The scraped columns, price conversions. And the word found, confirmation of arrival. It's all procedural. He flipped the book back to the earliest entries, tracing the blank left margins. See how the handwriting changes? The first scribe was meticulous. He gathered information. He categorized. This was the intake phase. And the second hand, Martha said, pointing to the later ink, was about closure. Inventory in, inventory out. What government office kept ledgers like this? Carver asked, though both already knew the answer, none that admitted to trafficking human beings under the guise of bureaucratic routine. Martha pressed her palms flat on the table. This ledger masqueraded as an administrative form. If anyone had found it in the 19th century, they'd assume it was a census record or plantation ledger. All the signatures look official. It was official, Carver said. Just not for the government. It was official for the network. He opened the ledger to the faint warehouse codes again. These markings weren't hidden from the people who used them. They were hidden from us. They communicated which women were ready for transport, which had been processed, which were being held. Every stroke served a purpose. And the scraped-off financial column, Martha added. That's the smoking G*N. Someone removed the numbers because the numbers exposed value, profit. Without those figures, it becomes a list of names. With no obvious meaning. Carver tapped the page with the back of his pen. They didn't want future generations to know what those women were worth. Or who earned the money. Martha closed her eyes, imagining the ledger in its original context. A clerk dipping a quill in ink. A doctor noting which women could survive sedation. A boatman waiting for the signal that the river was clear. A plantation owner standing in the doorway, pretending he had no part in what was unfolding inside the warehouse. This ledger was an instruction manual, she said softly. A disguised registry of stolen women. Every number a code. Every mark a signal. Every absence deliberate. Carver nodded. It survived only because it was hidden behind a wall. If they had found it before abandoning the building, they would have burned it. Martha reached for the disintegrating fragment they had discovered hours earlier, the document confirming shipment to Bradford and Kane, its fragile fibers barely holding the ink together. This piece proves coordination. But the ledger proves design. Together, the documents formed a blueprint of a trafficking apparatus woven into the county's infrastructure, river routes monitored with silence, paperwork altered with practiced ease. Women stripped from their families and given false identities that followed them into distant markets. Carver looked around the dim archive room, as if expecting someone to step from the shadows and demand the ledger back. This wasn't opportunistic crime, he said. It was systemic. Bureaucratized. Sanitized by official language. Hidden in plain sight because it imitated the very documents that structured plantation life. Martha whispered, every name in here is a stolen life. Every entry is a blade buried in the historical record. And the ledger, Carver said, closing it gently, is the only surviving witness. The rest of the evidence, correspondence, transport logs, receipts, was destroyed. Someone ensured that all roads led nowhere. Martha felt the weight of that truth as a physical thing. The ledger had been designed not just to record theft, but to conceal it. An artifact forged in the language of authority to mask a crime committed with the full confidence of men who believed no one would ever expose their work. And for 176 years, no one had. For a long while, neither Martha nor Carver spoke. The ledger lay closed on the table, its cracked spine turned slightly toward the window as if it, too, wanted distance from the truth it carried. Outside, dusk was gathering, and the archive's fluorescent lights flickered to life, buzzing faintly, the sound of a building settling into evening, unaware that history had just shifted inside its walls. Martha finally broke the silence. What do we do with this? Carver's answer came slowly, like someone walking through ash. We document. We cross-reference. And then we prepare for the kind of backlash you only get when the truth threatens the living, not the dead. Because the dead, Martha realized, had already paid the full cost. The ledger's pages held the names of women who never returned to the Ocmulgee corridor. Mothers whose children woke to empty doorways. Wives whose husbands were questioned, punished, silenced. Communities that whispered for a season and then fell quiet under pressure from men who insisted nothing had happened. Nothing except the wound. Carver reopened the ledger to the first page, running a thumb over the neat columns of stolen names. Their identities, he said, ended here. The new names in Charleston erased everything before. Their families never had graves, only absences. And the people who took them, Martha murmured, went on with their lives. Carver nodded. Built wealth. built reputations, married into other prominent families, sent their children to universities, endowed libraries, ran for office. Their descendants sit on boards that decide how this county remembers itself. Martha thought of the initials on the shipping confirmation, the ones belonging to families that still held influence, still funded museums, still shaped public memory. The ledger wasn't merely a historical discovery, it was a mirror reflecting the present. "This will tear the county apart," she whispered. "No," Carver said. "It will finally describe it accurately." They worked through the night, making digital copies, sealing the original in a climate-controlled vault. With every scan, every preserved fiber, the women in the ledger seemed to step a little closer to the light, though never close enough to escape what had already been done to them. Near dawn, Martha pushed away from the desk, exhausted. Their children grew up thinking their mothers abandoned them. Carver didn't look up from his notes. They were told to think that a mother who disappears without a trace becomes a blamable ghost. Makes it easier to hide what was stolen. And their new lives? Martha asked. The ones they were forced into? Carver closed the folder. Those names are scattered across plantations in Louisiana and Texas. Records list them as cooks, maids, field hands. No origin. No prior family. Just acquired. Their children's birth records carry surnames not their own. Their histories start mid-sentence. The room felt colder. The sun was rising, but dawn did not soften what they had uncovered. Instead, it sharpened it, made every implication more visible. The men who orchestrated this, Martha said quietly, never faced a single consequence. Why would they? Carver replied. The system they built rewarded them. And when the Civil War came, the records that could have condemned them burned with plantations or were quietly removed from county ledgers. They died respected. Their portraits hang in courthouse hallways. The ledger, sealed now behind glass in the archive's secure case, seemed to pulse with its own bleak gravity. It was the last surviving witness to a crime that had touched dozens of families, reshaped generations, and vanished into the polite silence of Southern history. Martha stepped closer to the case. Through the glass, the word found stared back at her, ink faded but still sharp, still final. They were never found, she said. Carver joined her, hands in his pockets, face lined with fatigue. No, he said. They were taken. Delivered. Recorded. And forgotten. A moment passed, long, heavy, unmoving. Outside, the river that had carried the women into darkness kept flowing, indifferent, unchanged. Trees bent over its banks the same way they had in 1848, their reflections trembling in the current. Nothing in the world bore witness except the ledger and the two people standing before it. History had surrendered a secret, but not a resolution. Martha turned off the lights, leaving the ledger glowing faintly under its preservation lamp, a lone artifact holding the truth that every official document had tried to bury. In the quiet, the past settled back into place, unfinished and unforgiven. And the word that had masked 100 stolen lives remained etched in the last surviving record, colder than any epitaph found.